It was a cool spring evening in Ashburn, Virginia, the kind of evening where the streets emptied early and the air smelled faintly of fresh rain and blooming dogwood trees. The city, a peaceful suburban hub, had already tucked itself in. Porch lights glowed warmly, sprinklers clicked in neatly trimmed lawns, and the occasional hum of a passing car stirred the quiet. On Reynolds Road, the heart of downtown, most businesses had closed their doors hours ago, leaving only the soft glow of street lamps reflecting off wet asphalt. Captain Naomi Brooks drove her black government-issued SUV steadily through the nearly deserted streets. The vehicle wasn't flashy, but it was unmistakably official, sleek, spotless, with just the faint tinting on the windows and a small government tag tucked discreetly into the windshield. Naomi sat tall behind the wheel, her hands firm but relaxed. Her mind, however, was already halfway home, replaying notes from the security briefing she had just finished at the Pentagon. It had been a long day, one that had begun before sunrise, stretched across endless conference tables, and ended with quiet decisions that would ripple across regions she was tasked to protect. Still dressed in civilian clothes, a simple khaki jacket, a neat dark blue button-down, jeans, and clean sneakers, Naomi looked nothing like the high-ranking military officer she was. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun at the nape of her neck, and her face, calm and composed, wore the look of someone used to carrying burdens heavier than most people would ever know. There was no insignia, no ribbons or medals tonight, only the quiet authority that seemed to wrap around her like a second skin. As she cruised down Reynolds Road, her speed steady under the limit, she hardly paid attention to the patrol car parked in the shadow of a closed pharmacy up ahead. A moment later, red and blue lights flashed against the darkened glass of the storefronts, cutting across the calm like a blade. Naomi's brows drew together slightly. She glanced in her rearview mirror, confirming what she already knew. The cruiser was pulling out, its headlights snapping on, following her. Without hesitation, Naomi flicked her turn signal and pulled to the curb, her movements deliberate and measured. She switched the engine off, placed her hands visibly on the steering wheel, and rolled her window halfway down, following the same steps she had drilled into younger officers over her 20-year career. Stay calm. Stay respectful. Make no sudden moves. It was second nature by now. In her side mirror, she watched as the officer approached, his silhouette rigid, purposeful. The man was tall, bulky under the standard black uniform, one hand casually resting near the holster at his hip, the other clutching a flashlight that cut a harsh beam across her face. He didn't go to the passenger side for safety. He came straight to hers, his boots heavy on the pavement, his posture already brimming with an authority that didn't invite conversation. It demanded compliance. "License and registration," he barked out, his voice sharp, not offering even a perfunctory greeting. Naomi kept her face neutral. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" Her voice was even, polite, clipped with the formality she had mastered over decades of service. The officer, his name tag reading Harrison, squinted at her, the flashlight unwavering as it illuminated every line of her composed expression. "You were weaving between lanes," he said. "Possible DUI. Step out of the vehicle." Naomi blinked once, slowly. "I wasn't weaving," she said carefully. "And I haven't been drinking. I said step out of the vehicle." His voice rose, pressing harder now, sensing any resistance as a challenge to his command. Naomi took a slow breath. She moved, unhurried, reaching into the glove compartment for her registration and ID, making sure every motion was visible. She passed him the documents with the same calm she might have used handing over a pen at a meeting. "This is a government vehicle," she said. "I'm a federal officer returning from official duty." Harrison didn't even glance at the ID, didn't seem to register the seals and signatures that would have told him everything he needed to know. Instead, he gave a small smirk, one corner of his mouth lifting in a way that made Naomi's spine straighten instinctively. "That's supposed to mean something?" he said, stepping closer. "Out here, lady, you're just another driver. Badge or no badge, you're not above the law." Naomi met his gaze steadily. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear. Only a grave, weary disappointment, the kind that came from recognizing an old battle playing out again in a new uniform. "I never said I was above the law," she answered, voice like iron wrapped in silk. For a long moment, They stood there, the night around them heavy with unsaid things. The empty street, the humming engine cooling in the spring air, the harsh white glare of the flashlight cutting through the dusk. Then Harrison's hand shifted closer to his holster. His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "Step out, now." And Naomi, with the calm grace of someone who had survived far worse than a patrolman with a bruised ego, unlocked the door and stepped into the night. The moment Naomi's feet touched the pavement, Officer Harrison's stance changed. He squared his shoulders, legs slightly apart, hand resting with an unnecessary familiarity near the butt of his pistol. It wasn't procedure, it was theater, a message. Naomi stood still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture betraying none of the simmering frustration coiling quietly in her chest. She knew better than to escalate. She knew how quickly things like this spiraled, how one wrong glance, one misplaced breath could turn a simple traffic stop into something that made headlines or funerals. "Turn around," Harrison barked. "For what reason?" Naomi asked, voice still composed but firm enough to draw a slight flicker of irritation across his face. "Field sobriety test. You're slurring your words. Your eyes look glassy." Naomi almost laughed at the absurdity, but she caught herself. "I haven't had a single drink. I'm coming from a federal base. You can verify it." He took a step closer, the beam of his flashlight now almost pressed against her eyes. "Or you can make this real easy and do as I say." The threat wasn't veiled. It hung there, heavy, vibrating in the tense spring air. Naomi exhaled slowly through her nose, reaching into her jacket pocket. Not for a weapon, not for defiance, but for her phone. With slow, careful movements, she tapped the screen twice. The recording light blinked to life. "This interaction is being recorded for documentation purposes," she said aloud, her voice carrying with the clipped authority that only made Harrison's jaw tighten. He stepped back half a pace, just enough to register the camera, but not enough to deflate his stance. "That won't save you from resisting an officer." "I'm not resisting," Naomi said calmly. "I'm complying and protecting myself." For a second Harrison hesitated. Deep down, perhaps something in him knew he had gone too far. But the moment passed, and pride, wounded and desperate, surged to fill the gap. "Hands on the vehicle," he snapped. Naomi, heart hammering with quiet fury, turned and placed her palms flat against the cool surface of her SUV. In the empty street, it felt as if the whole world was holding its breath. Harrison patted her down aggressively, his movements rough, unnecessary. She could feel the judgment in every shove, the accusation in every pass of his hands. "You got any weapons on you?" he demanded. "No," Naomi replied simply. "Drugs? Anything you're hiding?" "No." Each question was louder than the last, meant less to discover the truth than to humiliate. Satisfied he had made his point, or maybe sensing the recording was now his biggest liability, Harrison pulled back and muttered, "Wait here." Naomi turned slowly, standing tall again, feeling the weight of 100 injustices carried by generations of people like her, pressing invisibly against her spine. She watched as he went back to his cruiser, muttering into his radio. The words didn't reach her, but the intent was clear enough. Back up. A show of force for a woman whose only crime was existing in a space Harrison thought she didn't belong. Within minutes, another cruiser pulled up, tires screeching slightly on the damp pavement. 2 officers stepped out, young and wide-eyed. They approached with caution, but were immediately pulled into Harrison's narrative, listening to his low, clipped words, eyes flicking toward Naomi with a mixture of suspicion and tension. She caught snippets. Non-compliant, suspicious, possible federal imposter. It took everything Naomi had not to let her hands curl into fists. She was a decorated officer. She had served this country longer than any of these men had been old enough to shave. And here she stood, treated like a criminal because one officer couldn't see beyond his own prejudice. One of the new officers approached cautiously. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step away from the vehicle and sit on the curb." "No," Naomi said simply. "I'm not under arrest. I have identified myself. I have complied fully. I am recording this for my protection." The younger officer hesitated, glancing nervously at Harrison. "Do it," Harrison growled. "No," Naomi said again, her voice firmer now, each syllable weighed down by decades of knowing exactly when a fight was worth every ounce of dignity she had. "If you do not comply," Harrison barked, "you will be charged with obstruction of justice." Naomi locked eyes with the young officer, her gaze steady, unshaking. You touch me without cause, you will be liable for violating federal protocol. I advise you to think very carefully about your next move. The officer flinched, clearly uncertain. Naomi could see the fear behind his bravado, the dawning realization that something about this stop was wrong. Very wrong. And before anyone could speak again, the low, unmistakable hum of a large vehicle broke the tense silence. From down the street, a black government SUV rolled into view, headlights off, but unmistakably official. Harrison turned, confused, his hand drifting instinctively toward his weapon again, but the young officer stepped back, sensing the shift before he did. The new vehicle pulled up alongside the scene, and a woman stepped out, short, crisp uniform, ribbons gleaming against her chest, even in the dim light. Major General Evelyn Monroe. Naomi almost smiled. Evelyn's voice cut through the heavy air like a blade. Captain Brooks, are you all right? Heads whipped around. The two young officers froze completely. Harrison went pale beneath his bravado. Naomi straightened fully. Yes, ma'am, I'm recording the entire incident. Evelyn's eyes snapped to Harrison. Cold, calculating. You, she said to Harrison. Step away from her, now. And for the first time that night, Officer Harrison hesitated and obeyed. Officer Harrison stepped back, his boots scraping lightly against the asphalt, but his hands still hovered near his belt, like he was daring himself to regain control. His mouth opened, probably to blurt out some hollow excuse, but Major General Monroe spoke first, her voice cutting through the night like a knife through paper. State your probable cause for detaining a federal officer, she commanded, every syllable sharpened by authority. Harrison faltered. His lips moved, searching for words, but none came out. I'm waiting, Monroe said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. Her uniform caught the faint glow of the streetlights, the silver eagles on her shoulders gleaming. She wasn't yelling. She didn't have to. Every single person on that street understood exactly who held command now. I observed erratic driving patterns, Harrison mumbled, but the words barely held together under the weight of his shame. And did you administer a sobriety test? Yes, ma'am. Did the individual pass? Yes. And despite her passing, you attempted to escalate this to a physical detainment based on what evidence exactly? Harrison's throat bobbed in a hard swallow. His face was flushing deeper by the second, exposed under the harsh scrutiny he could no longer deflect. The two younger officers stood rigidly still, eyes darting between Monroe and Harrison, their hands stiff by their sides as if hoping the asphalt would swallow them whole. Monroe turned her gaze briefly to Naomi, who stood quietly to the side, her phone still recording, the small red light blinking steadily, unblinking, undeniable. Captain Brooks, Monroe said, softer now, but every inch the commanding presence she was, I apologize for what has happened here. You should never have been put in this position. Naomi gave a small, respectful nod, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. The power had already shifted. Monroe turned back to Harrison. Officer, you are hereby ordered to surrender your badge and your service weapon immediately pending a full investigation. The words struck harder than any shouted accusation. You can't be serious, Harrison stammered, voice cracking. I didn't. You profiled, you escalated, you lied, Monroe said, her voice still measured but deadly calm. And worse, you attempted to intimidate a superior officer under false pretenses. Consider yourself fortunate this isn't ending with federal charges tonight. Harrison's shoulders sagged visibly as reality crashed down on him. He unfastened his badge, the metal gleaming one last time in the streetlight, and placed it with shaking hands into Monroe's outstretched palm. His sidearm followed, slower, as if by delaying the moment he could somehow undo the damage. When the items were secured, Monroe took a slow breath and addressed the younger officers. Did either of you question the validity of this stop? The taller of the two, Officer Keller, swallowed hard. I wasn't sure, ma'am, he admitted, eyes downcast, but I should have spoken up. And you didn't, Monroe said. Let that failure haunt you until it shapes you into something better. There was no anger in her voice, only disappointment, and somehow that struck deeper than any shouting ever could. Turning slightly, Monroe gave Naomi a nod of respect, the kind exchanged between warriors who had survived a battle not of bullets, but of pride, prejudice, and principle. Captain, I suggest we document everything tonight fully and officially, Monroe said, her gaze flicking meaningfully to Naomi's still recording phone. "Already done, ma'am," Naomi replied, her voice clear and even. Behind them, Harrison stood frozen, stripped of the shield he had once believed made him untouchable. His fellow officers avoided his gaze. The heavy air pressed down on all of them, thick with the realization that this wasn't just a reprimand. It was a reckoning. As Monroe turned to lead Naomi toward her SUV, the silence of the street grew heavier still, broken only by the muted click of her polished boots against the cracked pavement. And though no one said it aloud, every man standing there knew the truth. Authority without integrity would never again go unchallenged when women like Naomi Brooks and Evelyn Monroe stood on the front lines. The next morning, the world knew. Footage of the stop, both Naomi's recording and the newly released body cam, circulated like wildfire across social media. News outlets ran headlines not just about the unlawful detainment, but about the fact that a decorated captain had been profiled, handcuffed, and humiliated for no reason other than bias. The mayor of Brentwood issued a formal statement by noon, expressing grave concern over the actions of Officer Harrison and promising a full review of the police department's training and practices. Within 24 hours, Harrison was officially suspended without pay, pending disciplinary proceedings. It wouldn't save his reputation. That was already crumbling beyond repair. Meanwhile, Captain Naomi Brooks didn't seek interviews. She didn't stand in front of cameras demanding retribution. She simply returned to her duties, overseeing emergency logistics operations for the state, managing crisis response teams, mentoring the next generation of officers who might one day have to face their own tests of strength and dignity. A week later, Naomi stood quietly at a leadership seminar hosted by the Brentwood Civic Center. She hadn't planned to speak. She was there to observe. But when the moderator asked if anyone had first-hand experience with injustice in uniform, the room turned instinctively toward her. She took the microphone, her heart steady, her hands sure. "I wore a uniform long before I ever put on a badge," she said, her voice even but carrying unmistakable weight. "And that uniform taught me one thing above all else. Authority is not given to make you powerful. It's given to make you responsible." The room fell into deep, attentive silence. "When Officer Harrison pulled me over," Naomi continued, "he wasn't just testing me. He was testing the entire system he represented. And he failed. Not because he didn't know the law, but because he forgot what it means to uphold it with honor." A few heads bowed in quiet recognition. Others sat straighter, as if absorbing every syllable into their bones. "I didn't fight back with violence. I fought back with truth, with discipline. With every lesson my mother taught me about carrying yourself with dignity, even when the world refuses to see it." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "Some people think the real victory is in shouting louder than your oppressors, but sometimes the greatest power is simply refusing to shrink." No applause followed her words, just a deep, resonant silence that meant people were thinking, feeling, shifting inside themselves. As Naomi left the stage, Major General Evelyn Monroe stood waiting by the exit, arms folded, a proud glint in her eye. "You didn't just win a fight last week, Captain," Monroe said quietly. "You set a standard." Naomi offered a small smile. "We all deserve better. Someone had to start demanding it." Outside, the spring air was fresh and bright, the sun warming the sidewalks of Brentwood. Naomi stepped out into the light, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a leader who understood that change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in stands taken when no one else dares. She wasn't naive. She knew there would be more battles ahead, bigger, harder, sometimes lonelier. But she also knew something deeper now. True strength isn't in how hard you hit back. It's in how fiercely you refuse to be broken. And sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that never had to shout at all. As Naomi disappeared down the quiet street, the story didn't end. It just passed from her hands into those willing to listen, to learn, to change. Because real stories like hers aren't meant to gather dust, they're meant to inspire. If you believe in standing up for what's right, even when no one is watching, if you believe in the quiet courage that changes the world one choice at a time, stay with us. Follow, share, and subscribe to hear more true stories of strength, dignity, and the kind of leadership the world needs now more than ever.